So first I'd like to introduce Rabbi Yehuda Sarna. Rabbi Yehuda Sarna is the executive director of the Edgar J. Bronfman Center for Jewish Life at New York University. He serves as one of two university chaplains at NYU and as an adjunct professor at the Robert F. Wagner School of Public Service. Co-founder of the Of Many Institute for Multi-Faith Leadership, Rabbi Sarna was recently the subject of a documentary produced by Chelsea Clinton entitled Of Many, which we just had the honor of watching. Rabbi Sarna lives in Manhattan with his wife, Michelle, and their 6 awesome children. Rabbi Yehuda Sarna. Next, we have Imam Khalid Latif, who was appointed the first Muslim chaplain at NYU in 2005, where he began to initiate his vision for a pluralistic future on and off campus for American Muslims. He was also appointed the first Muslim chaplain at Princeton University in 2006. He decided to commit full-time to New York University's Islamic Center, where his position was officially institutionalized in the spring of 2007. In 2007, then Mayor Michael Bloomberg nominated Imam Khalid to become the youngest chaplain in the history of the New York City Police Department. He most recently was selected as one of 60 New York City's leaders to serve on Mayor Bill de Blasio's transition team, helping to recommend and select individuals for key roles in the current New York City administration. Imam Khalid is a sought-after speaker, having lectured throughout the United States and in various parts of the world, and has been quoted and featured and appeared in numerous media outlets, including the Huffington Post, BBC, NPR, CNN, the New York Times, Katie Couric, New York Magazine, The Colbert Report, Newsweek, Time Magazine, BET, GEO TV, and many more. Amongst many awards and distinctions for leadership in community service over the last few years, Imam Khalid Latif has been named the Global Interfaith Visionary by the United Nations Temple of Understanding in 2010 and one of 100 New York City luminaries by the New York Public Library. I have had the honor and pleasure the last 3 years on a personal note to work closely with Imam Khalid. Each year we take a group of students and members of his community and of Yale University with another chaplain, Omar Bajwa, to perform what is called the Umrah, which is the lesser pilgrimage to Mecca and Saudi Arabia. This year will be our largest group. We're leaving next Thursday with 130 participants in our group. So Ali Ataie has been involved in interfaith activities for over 15 years. He has been a guest lecturer and a guest instructor at several colleges and universities, including Cal Poly State, UC Davis, UC Berkeley, UCLA, Cal State East Bay, and others, and has engaged in dialogues and debates with numbers of Christian scholars on topics ranging from the historicity of resurrection of Christ, upon whom be peace, and the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace. He studied various Islamic sciences with local San Francisco Bay Area scholars, and has a graduate of Badr Arabic Language Institute in Hadramaut, Yemen, and studied at the prestigious Dar al-Mustafa and also in Hadramaut, Yemen, under some incredible luminaries and scholars of our time. He holds a master's degree in biblical studies from the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, with an emphasis upon the New Testament, and he is the first Muslim seminarian in 147 years in the history of the school to earn that degree. He is certified in Arabic, Hebrew, and Biblical Greek, and is fluent in Farsi. Currently, he is working on his PhD in Islamic Biblical Hermeneutics at the GTU, and is an adjunct professor in Islamic Studies and lectures on world religions at the GTU. Please join me in welcoming our distinguished guests.
I want to make sure to leave a good chunk of time for the audience, you all, to ask your questions. So maybe I'll just engage with these two gentlemen, these two scholars, ask a couple of questions. Firsthand about the film that we just saw, the beautiful film that we just saw. Let me ask Imam Khalid, and then also Rabbi Sarna, if you can also give us your response. Why did you guys think that this film was important, and what do you think should be our takeaway from watching this film?
I think at that point we didn't really know what the end product would look like, but we've shown this film at various universities, at different houses of worship, governmental institutions. It's being shown in different countries right now by the producer of the film. And one of the more interesting things that I think comes out of it is how it compels people who are not of either of our faith backgrounds, and they find themselves in the story. I think the more prevalent narratives that we tend to get bombarded with today tend to be more antagonistic. They draw off of elements that tell us to be more segmented and validate for us not coming together in any way, shape, or form. And what we found in many audiences were individuals who were doing really amazing work. They were transcending boundaries, socially constructed differences, issues that we all know and see, unfortunately, day to day in the media, and we wonder, are we reading news from a week ago, or are we reading, new news? And it was interesting because it allowed for us, I think, to connect to that many more individuals who gave us a sense of empowerment, but also motivated us to think of different ways to get the film out there so that those who were doing important work and coming together would find a different sense of strength to continue to do what they were doing and to go out and share their story that much more concretely, even if it was on a grassroots level, to start to combat some of the more antagonistic narratives that unfortunately tend to socialize us in a way that says, here now is how you engage the other.
First, I just wanted to say thank you for having me. I visited here for the first time a year and a half ago and was just so struck by the creativity, the sincerity, the energy of being a startup school. So I just want to bless everyone who's carrying this school on their shoulders, just with success and fulfillment. One of the things, there are a few lines that we found that audiences will take away and say, this line really struck me. One is the line that Khalid says, we don't just come together to talk, we come together to do. And that I think really resonates with people because they say, you know what, there's only so much that can be accomplished by getting together and listening or talking or understanding. But if you can't bring it into the realm of action, then what really have you done? And the second thing is there's a line by one of the students where she just kind of says, she makes it sound almost simple. Let's just get together, do something constructive, which follows values that we both hold, and then we'll be able to understand each other, work together through a framework of friendship instead of a framework of antagonism. It's just what's the starting point? Is the starting point common ground, or is the starting point a debate? And the combination of those two lines really does inspire people, because it's one thing to say that it's important to act, and then it's another thing to say that actually to do something is really simpler than you think it is. And I think those are the two things that people find empowering.
Thank you very much. I think many people here are perhaps wondering, how is this even possible? You guys are genuinely good friends. And we heard from somebody commented in the video that, as you alluded to, that if your starting point of conversation is related to political difference, then people are going to be even more polarized in their opinions, and they'll go away with antagonism. So can you speak to that? What was your secret coming together and having this friendship blossom while still having those differences? And then how do you talk about those differences? In what type of forum do you talk about those differences? Or do you talk about those differences?
I mean, one of the things that's been really important is the kind of respect that we have for each other is founded not in the fact that we would agree on everything, because we don't, but instead I think I certainly respect in Khalid his passion and commitment, first and foremost to his own community, and that's something that I can respect deeply. It's almost as if we agreed on everything, then that in a way that would be a symptom that he was not necessarily prioritizing his own community, and ultimately I think it's very important, if we're honest, that we all have families, and we all have a broader circle of family, and our relationship to other people falls along a model of concentric circles which emanate outward. And I think it's just an illusion, an unhelpful illusion, to say we're going to forego our identity and just all exist as cosmopolitans. I think there's something which is naive about that, and ultimately unproductive. We have smaller units of connection, and I think that that's one of the things that I really respect.
Yeah, I think to echo some of the sentiments, I know that the time is constrained. I could sit here and tell you tons of stories and experiences I've had with Rabbi Yehuda Sarna that just illustrate to me the kind of character that he has, and in a similar vein allows for him to maintain his ideals and sense of value without having to compromise on really being able to be there for people who are different. You saw some of that in the film. He stood with our students at a time when our Muslim community was quite small in terms of clout. When the film talked about the Danish cartoons, I think one of the more powerful scenes, and I still remember it quite vividly, experiencing it, while we're praying together outside, he's standing near us praying. I think most recently where it hit me very hard was we both went to speak at Duke University a couple of weeks ago. And once the program was finished, there's a young man by the name of Faris who reached out to me asking if he could have dinner with me. And I turned to Yehuda and I said, do you want to come and have dinner with us? And this is after he's had like a very long, strenuous day. He caught a flight at 8:30 in the morning. I caught one 3 hours later. My flight landed at 1:30 in the afternoon, and his flight didn't take off till 4:45 in the afternoon. And then he walked into our program about 10 minutes into it, just straight from the airport, hadn't eaten anything, sat down. We went to dinner. Faris started telling us about his family, his life circumstances, community center he's working on. And I said, Faris, I'd love to go and see your family. And so he took myself and Rabbi Sarna at about midnight to a cemetery where his brother Dia and his sister-in-laws Yusra and Razan were buried. There were 3 students who were shot at Chapel Hill a little more than a year ago. And while we're standing there, I'm reciting some Quran, saying some supplications. Faris, who is Dia's brother, was standing a little bit behind me, and he's crying, and I'm crying. And in the midst of it, Yehuda goes and puts his arm around Faris and consoles him. He didn't have to stand and pray the way that I was praying. He didn't have to kind of adopt my ritual for us to have that kind of bond. But he was there in the way that he was supposed to be, in the way that he could be, and let himself be. I think, that's something to understand about who he is personally. That kind of relationship allows for us to be able to understand and recognize that the existence of narratives that are in conflict with each other are a reality, and we can't deny them. but how we can leverage our relationship to move forward and think of actual solutions. If you asked us 10 or 15 years ago, would we think that we would be sitting with some of the people that we sit with today? I would say no. But I think we've come to a recognition that ceasefires are not a solution, that the Band-Aids that we put on some of these circumstances are in fact Band-Aids, and all they do is probably create more of a perpetuation of systemic violence of populations that are grossly mistreated and oppressed. And we can sit down now and think, well, how can we actually be a part of fixing that and ensuring that what transpired yesterday is not going to necessarily be a reality tomorrow, because we'll move beyond just a simple understanding of multi-faith work that says we're going to sit on a stage and talk about how we all love the prophet Abraham, but more so put our relationship into an action that says coming together today is going to, God willing, make it a different place tomorrow, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Well, something that we all do have in common is belief in God. You may have heard of this. Several months ago, a Wheaton College professor was put on leave because she said that Muslims and Christians worship the same God. Now, when you get down to the theological nitty-gritty, there are significant differences between Trinitarian theology and Islamic theology as espoused by Sunnite and Shiite theologians. So my question to you, gentlemen, is, do Jews and Muslims worship the same God? If it is the same God, who is this God? What is his personality? How does he reveal himself to humanity? And what is the principal teaching of this God? It's kind of a multi-tiered question. If you can enlighten us, please. Two minutes or less. No, I'm just joking.
I think you're going to be disappointed with any answer that I give. It's going to be so shallow and superficial compared to the depth of that question. In fact, I'm tempted to do what sometimes Khalid and I do in our class when someone asks us a question. We just say, well, what do you think? I'll tell you what I think is the problem, is that there's almost an assumption that many people make that if we pray to the same God, then we should all get along. And if we don't pray to the same God, then it almost makes sense that we would be at odds with each other. I would like to see us think about it as that the challenge of this generation is to say, let's say that we don't believe in the same God. Now, our work is to figure out how we continue to get along.
I think that might be for you. I don't know.
It's for Medina.
It's for Medina. I think I'm definitely not an expert in religion in and of itself, especially not the way that you are. I don't say that to kind of feign humility. I'm definitely not an expert in comparative religion. And I think in the work that I do, more as a community leader, an activist, a community organizer, my understanding of how God plays a role in my life and who he is to me, and how people of diverse backgrounds connect to God isn't necessarily manifest through kind of rhetoric and discourse, but really through action and how they live their life. And I could say my own personal belief in God has been heavily impacted by my relationship with Rabbi Yehuda Sarna, in that having known him, he was probably one of the first people I ever met in my life who I felt actually really believed in God. And I grew up in a Muslim family. I was surrounded by Muslims all the time. It's not to, pass judgment on anyone, but I think as now I've gotten older, a lot of that also ties to understanding how he is kind of moved by a sense of values, and he knows what it is that impacts and motivates him to make certain decisions and actions. I think when we become people of faith and religion at times, ritual becomes an ends rather than a means to an ends. And as a Muslim, I think there at times becomes an overt emphasis on legalistic frameworks at the expense of concepts such as love, compassion, mercy, and hope. I don't think it has to be either or. I think it has to be both and. But my framing of who God was to me has probably changed substantially in the last 7 or 8 years of my life, and definitely in the last few years of my life, having interacted with diverse populations, and also just taking a time to move away from this very kind of abstract perspective of God that I learned through certain texts or through other people's words, and to sit down and start to think about, well, who is God to me? And so, I don't know. I've actually never had this conversation with you. And I think it's very interesting to think about that. Why would we never have to have had that conversation? Given the urgency of the time and really what it is that our role is, more so to affirm through the work that we do. When I met him, I didn't doubt that God existed. And through my interaction with him, it helped me to understand that not only does God exist, but that God is a merciful God, a loving God, and a God that I can have hope in. And I think, to me, that has played a critical role in our relationship.
Thank you very much. Rabbi Hillel was asked by one of his students, summarize the Torah for me. This is the answer, by the way. No, I'm just kidding. I think Imam Khalid, he used the words I was looking for when he said mercy and compassion. So Rabbi Hillel, he quoted to this man 3 pesuchim of the Torah, right? Deuteronomy 6:4, 6:5, Leviticus 19:18. Who knows them? I know you know them. Interestingly, in the New Testament, right, a scribe comes to Jesus and asks him, what is the greatest commandment? And he quotes these three verses from the Torah. God is one, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. No other commandment is greater than these two, at least according to Mark chapter 12. The rest is commentary, said Hillel. That's not to say that it's not important. 613 mitzvot, we understand it's important, no problem. But this is the essence of the teaching. This is the God of Abraham. This is his personality, at least I would say, which leads to my final question before we turn it over to the audience. So I needed to hear the word compassion to go to this segue into the final question, which is the hardest question. It's a hard one. Hope you guys are ready. You may take the Fifth Amendment. Being that compassion is at the foundation, the essence of our faith traditions, I think everyone would agree with that. How do you deal with verses in the text that are so-called violent verses? What do you do with them? Why are they there? What purpose do they serve? How do you put them in context? When these certain things are quoted out of context, I can certainly take any book and quote things out of context and make it seem extremely violent, right? But how do you deal with these verses when people ask you, as an imam, as a rabbi, it happens to me sometimes, sometimes I'm ambushed by different types of people. The Quran says this, how do you deal with it? I'm curious to know how you all deal with that. It's a tough one. Sorry.
Yeah, what do you think? I would say 3 things. The first is to not deny it. It's there, right? It's there, it's black on white. And so that's the first. The second thing is, So I find the second thing, which is true, is very difficult to communicate to people who are not of the same faith, which is every religion has interpretive mechanisms, and I'm sorry if I'm going to get a little abstract here, interpretive mechanisms to subdue or mute or qualify passages which don't cohere with other parts of the same sacred text. And those strategies include things like historical contextualization. That was said at that time, but it's different nowadays. Or based on circumstance. Only in that case, when there was a certain condition present, would that verse hold true. But somehow I always feel frustrated because to a listener or a questioner who is not familiar with the inner workings of Jewish law or Jewish philosophy, and I presume the same thing in the other way, it comes off as very unsatisfying. But then the third thing that I would say, and this is ultimately most important, is whereas it's true that the text is important, ultimately the people now and our actions are the most important. And frankly, it matters to me much less as to whether the Jewish tradition is violent or not. I want to know what's much more important to me is how are Jews today conducting themselves? And I think ultimately that's much more meaningful. Very often when people ask about, isn't the Torah violent? Isn't the Quran violent? They're not really asking the theological question. They're asking the question about now.
I think the challenge that we find ourselves in is that Scripture, just like any text, has the opportunity fully to be interpreted by, the one who's doing its interpretation. And what you bring to that interpretation is nothing other than the presence of yourself. Traditionally, the engagement of the Quran was an exegetical analysis. People would derive meaning from the text. I think what we find more so today is individuals who do more of an eisegetical analysis. There's a formulation of an argument, a thesis, whatever. There's a cherry picking of verses and narrations from the tradition to be able to prove it. And so you can read the Quran and you can say that here's a text that empowers women, and you can read it and say, it justifies me beating my wife. You can utilize it to validate the pursuit of societal benefit, unconditional giving, and you could utilize it to justify a very exclusivist mindset that sees the world just as Islam and everything else. And so for the individual who's engaging the text, it's really about what they have inside of themselves is bringing them to their conclusion. If I have hate in me, then I'm going to give hate to the world. If I have anger in me, I'm going to give anger to the world. If I have greed in me, then I'm going to give greed to the world. If I have love in me, if I have compassion in me, that's what I'm going to give. That's what I'm going to share. I can't give something if I don't have it. I think within the Muslim sphere, in specific, there is a very obvious lack of literacy in what Islam says about most things, whether that is by Muslims or by people who are of other backgrounds. I think that's why an endeavor such as Zaytuna College is so important, not just for the institutionalization and advancement of Muslim communities in the United States and globally, but I think just for society on a whole, right? Our university is categorically different in terms of the work that it's able to do. And I would say without bias, that's because there's a very robust Islamic center on our campus. And you look at many other universities across the country, there's about 2 to 3 dozen Muslim chaplains. Some of them are part-time, some of them aren't even paid. And it's, a single staff position that isn't necessarily seen to grow strategically in any way. In the campuses that have nothing, you see not just a different sense of empowerment or ethic amongst Muslim students, but if you're a priest, a rabbi, a practitioner of any faith who's a professional, and then you're sitting at a chair with a 17-year-old kid because there's not somebody who is trained to be able to do what it is that you're doing, the level of output is going to be what it is. And I think in the engagement of text, that's what you find a lot as well. People are put on the spot to be able to engage, and they don't know necessarily how to combat those narratives that unfortunately manipulate text to be able to justify and validate a certain egocentricity that is quite antithetical to the fundamental ethos of Islam as a religion. So you have this growing narrative that, takes the Quran and turns it into a weapon that hurts people. But you don't have a narrative that is really being promoted or pushed that is not framed reactively, but proactively is going out and really seeing how Islam is meant to be a means for increasing benefit and reducing detriment. And I don't think that's because of Muslims in specific. I think there's many individuals whose only interest is their own self-interest. We see, people who are running for the presidency of this country every day getting up and vilifying Islam, as well as many other minority populations in the country. And they add more to, I think, those reductionist approaches to interpretation than anything else through their extreme voices and perspectives, because they validate and give it more strength, and really dilute and disempower the gross majority that look to understand and interpret text, through different mechanisms and through different perspectives. That's why I find really great promise and hope in this university, because I think it creates a different opportunity to be able to now fill certain gaps that exist. And may God grant you success in your endeavors here, and keep your intentions pure, because I think it's something that's really important. I've sat down, and I know I talk a lot, I'm sorry. I went to the Maldives a couple of times when they were first transitioning into a democracy. To be a citizen of the Maldives, you have to be Muslim. It's built into their constitution. And so I was there to kind of engage different municipalities, and it's really interesting, kind of the layout that they have there. But one of the things that ended up happening, you go from, it's an island country, so they take you on boats to different islands. And one morning we woke up early, and I said, "Where are we going today?" And there was, a group of men who had tried to blow up the Capitol building on the main island city some years ago. And they were in solitary confinement. And they said, "We're going to go and see them." And I said, "Oh, that's great. Thanks for letting me know that." And no one in our group was armed. And they essentially put me in this cell with these 12 guys. And I'm sitting face to face with this man who is seemingly kind of in charge of their group. And it was really crazy because he read the same book that I read, but he just reached a totally different conclusion on what it means. And you can't deny that that narrative exists, even if it's a minority, gross minority perspective. And I think the unfortunate reality for somebody who's weak like me is that I had to actually experience seeing somebody who thought in that way for me to understand that it really exists. And why then it's that much more important to do work like this, not to reactively identify myself the way many of us do. I'm not violent, I'm not a terrorist, I'm not oppressive to my women, but to understand the importance of going out and actually saying, this is what I am, this is what I believe, this is what my values are. You see what I mean?
Thank you. We have an open mic here for people who would like to come. Ask your question.
First of all, I really respect the work that you both do. You seem like really excellent examples and role models, and I just want to say thank you and respect. I really appreciate the focus on doing things, the way that you bring people together. I noticed in the video, I'm sure you've done a lot of different activities, but I noticed in the video, the activities that you did were in reaction to natural disasters. I feel like this model of building solidarity through action can also be used proactively. And I guess I'm wondering if you all have identified issues that are more important than others that can be worked on in an interfaith way, and what those issues might be to create a better tomorrow. There's so many problems, but have you identified a few things that are more important to work on than others?
Well, one, I would say, first of all, excellent question, and you're a great role model. Okay. One is certainly confronting hate. I do believe that it's important if one group feels like they are being discriminated against or agitated against, then it's important for that group to stand up. And at the same time, it's also important for other groups to stand up as well. So that's one area. The other thing is what's happened at NYU, what we've been privileged to work on, has been a consolidation of, and I don't know what the right word is, but bringing light to the interfaith work within the sphere of a university. And very often, within the context of a university, people have a hang-up. We're a secular institution, we can't talk about religion, we can't, there's that kind of mentality. And at NYU, what's happened is that the Multi-Faith Center was built right at the heart of the campus. Khalid was a speaker at graduation. The student speaker at a graduation was the president of the Muslim-Jewish dialogue group who was featured in this film. So she spoke at Yankee Stadium in front of thousands and thousands and thousands of people about the work that she was doing. And so in that way, there's been, we've been privileged to bring in to the center of a secular university, a very large secular university, discussions about religion. And from that vantage point, I would say, I would consider myself an educational activist, where arguably I'm not feeding millions of people or rebuilding millions of homes, but what I am trying to do is to shape hearts and minds, leaders of the future.
So, I think probably a year and a half ago, our titles at the university changed somewhat, where we now share the title of university chaplain. And there's 40 or 50 affiliated chaplains within a new division that's been created at NYU called Global Spiritual Life, various faith backgrounds. And I think that coming together allows for us to utilize our positions in this new office to mobilize a large student population and distinct communities that traditionally don't come together, not even because they dislike each other, they just don't have a reason to come together, to find new allies and partners to do very important work. I would say the specific things that have come out of it, aside from very much so proactive campaigns around, food drives and hunger, issues and, tutoring services and anti-trafficking campaigns. Our university, like many other universities across the country right now, is having a lot of conversations around diversity and race issues of inclusion. I serve on a steering committee for a university-wide process that is doing assessment of the university on a whole, both on the academic side as well as the administrative side, in terms of how diversity really factors into pretty much everything. But for us to be in places where we're very much so calling students on the campus at large to acknowledge the realities that Black people face in this country. Just yesterday, we spoke at a vigil for the 3 young Sudanese men who were killed execution style in Fort Wayne. And at a time when nobody's really talking about it or discussing it, the idea is not that we become so myopic in our perspective and think that it's really now about, a Jew and a Muslim coming together as a Jew and a Muslim, but how do we leverage what some of this film is talking about to really bring together diverse populations and have them become aware of certain inequities that exist, systemically and structurally, and what we can do to, beyond awareness, get people to start doing things about it. And so when you come to the vigils that happen on our campus, no one is sitting next to somebody who looks like the other person, right? They're all very different. And I think that comes from this proactive engagement that has us, mobilizing people in very different ways to cater to diverse populations, inclusive of diverse in terms of their own religious and spiritual observation. If you have people who, are painting a house, they're rebuilding something, it doesn't matter how quote-unquote good they are at their faith. You've created an entry point for them now to be able to find a new partner and ally to go out and think about how they can bring these different groups together to really engage certain things. If you were to ask me what would be the most important thing to be proactively a part of, I would say there's nothing more important right now in our country than being a part of the Black Lives Matter movement. I think, until we find an understanding and an individual awareness, and we overcome certain discomforts that we have, especially as people of faith, to recognize what our role is in advancing that movement, and seeing how the oppression that exists that yields that movement is really the catalyst for a lot of the other issues that we find day to day. I don't think we're doing what it is that we can do.
Thank you. Yes, please.
In the Lutheran seminary that I'm in, we have
I'm sorry, this will be the last question. I'm sorry.
I guess I'm here not quite with a question for you, but I'd like to say something that in our Lutheran seminary, we're required to take a course in another religious tradition taught by a practitioner of that religious tradition. And so I was lucky enough to take a class on Islam last semester. And I went back to Texas to visit my family, who had lots of nasty things to say about people who are Muslim. And I was able to actually say, well, no, this isn't that way. And I think that's what I hear you calling us to do here with the movie and what you do. So I guess my question is, what would you challenge us to do here in this place right now as we go forward?
Well, I think the question is, what would you challenge you to do? I mean, in all humility, I think you know this area and this much better than we do, than I do, certainly. I think it's very important not to get worn down and not to assume that small things don't matter. They do. They do, particularly if you invest in even small things, historic stature. You can say, I'm going to do something small now, which I believe will alter the course of this other person's life, this community's life, the fabric of this school. And I think if you believe it, I think it happens.
I would say that, whether you were on this stage signing a document or you were sitting in the room, your presence here denotes a certain commitment to something that is bigger than you. And you would want to think about how you individually challenge yourself and how you challenge the people who are sitting around you to be able to honor that commitment and not let it just be what it is that we've seen in terms of moments like this, that they are just for their own sake and they don't inform moments that come beyond this moment. And so you're here today, how are you going to come together tomorrow? And what are the different variations by which you're going to come together tomorrow? To be able to understand that the amount of talent that exists in this room, the access to resources, can yield certain strategies that can create spheres of influence that might start in a very local level that is just your surrounding area, but it starts to then permeate and create broader spheres of influence that impact and allow for us to really understand that through elements like compassion, you can both disrupt and transform society until it gets to a place of recognition that we're not really achieving anything until we start to serve our most underserved and underprivileged. And again, as we come together here, it'll necessitate an introspective understanding of how you come together tomorrow. You don't have to be black to stand up for black people's rights. You don't have to be Muslim to stand up for Muslims' rights. You don't have to be a woman to stand up for women's rights. And to not be platitudinal, but to really think about it. What does the signing of that document mean? And how does it tie into a recognition that the inequities that yield and take away and infringe upon the rights of any of those groups and the others that you all know exist, and we could just keep rattling off people who are unfortunately held down, that when there's an attack on any of them, that's really an attack on all of us. And so your challenge has to be, how do you live beyond yourself? How do you live bigger than yourself? And you be that person who lives in such a way that you don't just sit and talk to the person who's sitting next to you, but the person who's 5 rows behind you right now, that you don't even know their name, but they could be your partner in being that disruptive, transformational force and the catalyst that we really need.
Thank you very much. I'll end with this. John Sexton, the president of NYU, spoke at our fundraiser last weekend. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, one of the major diseases of our modern age is that we are ignorant of nuance and complexity, right? And he said, the world is complex and nuanced. So I want to end with a very quick prayer. May God make us people of nuance and complexity and give us the providence, the tawfiq, to be able to engage the world with those types of understandings, grounded in our tradition that's based in mercy, in unity, and in compassion. Amen. Thank you all for coming. Please give these two gentlemen a round of applause. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.